The paper wristband from the gala was still stuck to the inside of my coat pocket, bent and damp with sweat. And when I found it in the elevator Monday morning, I just stared at it and kept my face still. My name is Claire. I am 36, and I raise money for a private museum in Chicago. Most of my job has nothing to do with art, no matter what people think. It is timing, memory, reading a room before the room realizes it is being read, knowing when a donor wants to talk about legacy, when they want to talk about tax strategy, when they want to be admired, and when they want to be left alone with their own generosity long enough to convince themselves it was entirely their idea. I had been doing it for 11 years, which is long enough to know that the most expensive mistakes rarely happen out loud. That Monday, I was standing in the museum's staff elevator with a coffee I did not want, a blister on my heel from the gala shoes I had worn too long, and a donor relations coordinator named Ivy waiting for me upstairs. She had texted me at 6:12 that morning. "Can we talk before the team meeting?" No emoji, no exclamation point, no attempt to soften it. I read it while brushing my teeth and felt something low and cold move through my stomach, because I had sent her a message of my own the night before that was careful enough to look kind and formal enough to leave a record. "Thank you again for tonight. You did a beautiful job making people feel welcomed. I would love to debrief tomorrow morning before we get into the week. A few small notes for next time, but overall, strong work." A few small notes. That phrase had lived inside my profession for years. It usually meant this went well, but there is something you need to learn before someone more important notices it too. I stepped out of the elevator and crossed the quiet second-floor hallway toward my office. The museum was still closed to the public. The marble floors made every heel click sound too crisp. Somewhere downstairs, Facilities was rolling something heavy across the atrium, and the echo came up through the building like distant thunder. Ivy was already there. She stood when she saw me, smoothing the front of her navy blouse with both hands. She was 27, quick-minded, beautifully composed in that way some people are when they have spent years practicing how to enter a room as if no one has ever made them feel small in one. She had been with us 8 months. In that time, she had learned our donor database faster than anyone I had ever trained, remembered names after one introduction, and managed to make wealthy people feel both flattered and oddly understood. That combination is rare. Most people can do one or the other. Ivy could do both. That was why I had started bringing her into higher-level rooms. That was also why the knot in my chest kept tightening. "Morning," I said. "Morning." Her voice was steady, but she did not sit back down. I unlocked my office. "Come in." She stepped inside and waited until I closed the door. For a second, neither of us said anything. My office windows looked out onto the frozen sculpture garden. Gray sky, bare trees, a thin crust of old snow along the stone paths. On my credenza behind me sat 3 framed donor event photos and a stack of seating charts for the spring benefit that I had not yet had the energy to review. I set my coffee down. "You said you wanted to talk before the meeting." "I do." She looked at me directly. "Did I embarrass you on Saturday?" The question was so clean and blunt that I felt my own prepared language collapse in real time. "Ivy," I said carefully, "I do not think that is the right frame." Her mouth changed, just slightly, not a flinch, more like something shuddered. "Okay," she said, "then what is the right frame?" I had spent half the night telling myself that the smartest thing to do was move slowly, ask questions first, leave her dignity intact, let her show me what she understood before I named anything too clearly. But the problem with being good at restraint is that people start to think restraint means certainty. I folded my hands on my desk. "I think you did a lot right. More than right, honestly. You connected well. People liked you. You were warm without being stiff, which is hard in that crowd. And the part that was wrong? There it was." I looked at her for a moment and realized she had not come in hoping for reassurance. She had come in already wounded, and now she was deciding whether I was about to confirm something she feared or reveal something worse. I chose my words with care. "There were a few moments where the room shifted, and I am not sure you caught it." She said nothing. "At events like that," I continued, "especially smaller donor gatherings, the social shape matters as much as the conversation itself. There were a couple times you kept someone talking after they had already started to turn away, and later with the Whitmers you got more personal than I would have. I expected defensiveness, or confusion, or a tight little nod and a professional thank you. Instead, the color drained from her face so fast it startled me. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just gone. For one strange second I thought she might actually be sick. "I see," she said. I heard the distance in her voice and hated it instantly. "I am not saying you did anything unforgivable," I said. "This is exactly the kind of thing people learn over time. It is subtle." She gave one small nod. The silence that followed was wrong in a way I could feel physically. It reminded me of stepping onto ice that looks solid until the sound underneath changes. I tried again. "The gala circle can be deceptive. People smile. They invite warmth. They ask about you. And it can feel more intimate than it is. That does not mean they dislike you. It just means the role requires a different kind of pacing." Her eyes flicked to the floor, then back to me. "Was it when I mentioned my mother?" The question landed harder than I expected. I kept my expression neutral. That was part of it, yes. Saturday night came back to me in fragments then. Not in order. Just bright little pieces. The amber light of the donor's apartment before the pre-gala reception moved downstairs. Servers carrying trays of tiny toasts with pear and blue cheese. The city glowing through the windows. Ivy laughing beside the fireplace with a trustee's wife. Me across the room speaking with a board member and watching her from the corner of my eye. Pleased at first by how naturally she held attention. Then later the Whitmers. Callahan Whitmer was one of those donors who had perfected approachable wealth. Expensive without visible effort. Warm handshake. Soft voice, the kind of man who remembered interns' names and once underwrote an entire conservation project because he liked the way one curator described a damaged frame. His wife, Naomi, was sharper. Lovely, controlled, socially generous in measured doses. They mattered to us. Not just for money, for gravity. When they leaned in, other people followed. I had introduced Ivy because I wanted them to know her face before spring campaign season. And for the first 10 minutes, it had gone beautifully. Then Naomi asked Ivy where she was from. Ivy smiled and said, South Bend. My mom still cuts out every newspaper mention of me like I am running for mayor. Everyone laughed. That was normal, human, fine. Then Callahan, amused, asked whether her mother had always been that proud, and Ivy said lightly, only after I started working places she could brag about. Naomi's smile changed first, not vanished, tightened. Callahan did the polite thing people do when they want to leave a sentence on the floor without acknowledging the breakage inside it. He said, well, museums are certainly better dinner party material than my first job. He was trying to rescue it. I saw that immediately. What I also saw was Ivy, maybe mistaking his rescue for invitation, adding, trust me, it took a while. She used to tell people I worked front desk at a dental office because that sounded more respectable than debt collection. Still smiling, still graceful, still making it sound like a joke. The problem was not oversharing in some crude, obvious way. The problem was the shift. The room had moved from cultivated ease into accidental confession. It made the donors responsible for managing her vulnerability. And in relationship work, that is a tax you do not charge people unless you know them very, very well. I had drifted closer then, found a natural opening and redirected. Art acquisition, travel, spring plans. The moment passed, or I thought it had. Now Ivy stood in my office looking at me with the kind of stillness people wear when they are trying not to let a stranger witness the exact second they become ashamed. It was not just that, I said quietly. It was cumulative. You were trying to build warmth. I understand that. But there is a line between being memorable and making someone feel like they have suddenly been given more of you than they know how to hold. She stared at me, then she asked, did they say something to you? And that was the moment my chest tightened for real. Because yes, in a way they had. Not at the apartment, not directly. But Sunday afternoon, I had received an email from Naomi Whitmer that was perfectly polite and somehow worse because of it. Lovely to see you both last night. Your new coordinator is certainly memorable. No complaint, no accusation, no explicit problem. Just one sentence sitting there like a pin slid under a fingernail. I had read it 3 times and felt heat rise under my skin, not because it was catastrophic. It was not. These were exactly the kinds of donor signals that never entered a formal record, and still changed the air around future opportunities. I did not answer Ivy immediately, and when I hesitated, she understood anyway. Something in her face closed with such precision it almost looked elegant. Okay, she said, I understand. But she did not sound like someone who understood. She sounded like someone putting a lid on something that had just started burning. And before I could decide whether to stop her, soften it, or tell the truth more plainly, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded cream card. She placed it on my desk between us. I looked down. It was an invitation list addendum for the spring patron preview, marked up in Naomi Whitmer's handwriting. One name had been circled, mine, and underneath it, in blue ink, were 4 words that made the back of my neck go cold. Come alone this time. I looked up so fast my chair gave a small scrape against the floor. Where did you get this? Ivy's hand was already back at her side. It was tucked in with the seating materials Eliana dropped off for me yesterday. She said Naomi's assistant had them messengered over late Sunday. For a second, all I could hear was the low hum of the radiator under my window. Come alone this time. 4 words. Not openly hostile. Not even rude, technically. But in my world, tone was infrastructure. And that note was not casual. It was a boundary. My first instinct was procedural. Who else had seen it? Whether it had been meant for me privately, whether Naomi had written it impulsively and not expected it to travel through 3 administrative hands before it landed on my desk. But beneath all of that ran the uglier thought, the one I did not want to examine too quickly. Had I already been blamed? I slid the card back toward myself and kept my voice even. You should have brought this to me yesterday. I know. Why didn't you? She met my eyes. Because I wanted to see what you were going to say first. That one stung because I had earned it. I set the card down carefully. I appreciate you telling me now. I did not tell you now, she said. I waited. Her tone was still calm, which made every word sharper. Outside my office door, Someone laughed in the hallway. The sound floated past and disappeared. The rest of the museum was waking up around us. Phones would start ringing soon. The donor services team would begin printing acknowledgement letters. The registrar would complain about a shipping crate. My calendar had 3 cultivation calls before noon. Normal work was coming whether I was ready or not. Inside my office, none of it felt normal. Ivy, I said, I need to ask something, and I want you to hear the actual question, not the worst version of it. She gave the slightest nod. Did you realize in the moment that the Whitmers were trying to step back? A long pause. Yes, she said. The answer hit me harder than I expected, not because I thought she was naive. She was not, but because if she had noticed, then the night had not gone sideways by accident, at least not entirely. My voice stayed level, though I could feel my pulse in my throat. Then why keep going? Her face changed again, but this time not into shame, into something flatter. More tired, because Mrs. Whitmer had already spent 10 minutes asking me questions that were not museum questions. I frowned. What does that mean? It means she asked where I bought my dress, whether I lived alone, whether I had siblings, whether I had always wanted to work in culture, which is a very elegant way of asking whether I grew up around money. Ivy folded her arms, not defensively, but like she was holding herself in place. And when people ask you personal things in that tone, there are only 2 choices. You can answer lightly and look charming, or you can go vague and look cold. I thought back. I had seen pieces of that conversation from across the room, but not enough to hear the texture. Naomi had been smiling, leaning in. That particular social brightness women like her often used when they were collecting information they would later pretend not to remember. I did not know she was asking that much, I said. No, Ivy replied. You did not. There was no accusation in her voice. That almost made it worse. I should have ended the conversation there and moved into damage control. That would have been the smarter professional choice. Clarify the event, re-establish trust, decide next steps. Instead, I made the mistake people like me make when we believe context will save us. I still think you crossed a line, I said, even if she opened the door. Ivy let out one short breath through her nose, not quite a laugh. Of course you do. Something in me stiffened. That is unfair. Is it? Yes. She looked at the invitation list on my desk. You are worried about what that note means for you. The plainness of it flushed heat into my face. I am worried about what it means for the museum. No, she said softly. You are worried about both. And because she was right, I had nowhere graceful to stand. I held her gaze. I can care about the institution and still be affected personally. Those things are not mutually exclusive. I know. She said it so quietly that my anger had nothing to push against. The team meeting started in 14 minutes. I knew because my watch buzzed against my wrist. Neither of us moved. I said, tell me the whole thing. She did not pretend not to understand. The whole thing, she repeated. Yes. For the first time since she walked into my office, I saw genuine hesitation. She looked toward the window, toward the pale frozen garden outside, then back at me. You introduced me to them, she said. It went fine at first, better than fine. He was easy. She was studying me. I stayed silent. She asked where I went to school. I told her. She asked whether I had always wanted to work in museums. I told her no, not exactly. But once I got into development, I liked the strategy of it. Then she asked whether my family came to the museum often. I knew where this was going before she said it. They do not, Ivy said. My mother hates downtown parking and my father thinks modern art is a tax write-off with frames. Despite everything, a tiny, almost smile touched my mouth. It vanished just as quickly. She laughed, Ivy continued. Then she said, in that way people do when they want to sound admiring. Well, you wear this world very naturally. I felt a small hollow open in my chest. Because I knew that sentence too. Not that exact one, maybe, but its cousins. You seem so polished. I never would have guessed. You fit in beautifully here. All those socially acceptable little ways of announcing that someone had passed a test they had not known they were taking. I did not know what to do with that, Ivy said. If I brushed past it, I looked stupid. If I thanked her, I looked eager. So I made a joke. And then another. Yes. Why? Her eyes went to me then. Direct and unguarded in a way that made me wish I had not asked. Because once you realize people are clocking you, she said, sometimes you talk too much, trying to prove you already know what they are seeing. The room went very still. I knew enough in that moment to hear the truth in it. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. Ivy looked down at her hands. I knew I was doing it while I was doing it, which made it worse. Then I could feel you coming toward us to save it. And that made me feel 12 years old. There are sentences that do not raise their voice and still land like slaps. I leaned back slowly. She had not said you humiliated me. She had said I knew you were about to rescue me. That was different, smaller on paper, more devastating in real life. I thought about Saturday night again, the exact angle at which I had entered the circle, the ease with which I had redirected, the way Naomi had instantly taken the lifeline and turned toward me, the way Ivy's face, in memory, had gone bright and unreadable at the same time. My silence must have stretched too long, because Ivy said, I'm not saying you meant anything by it, but intention does not do much after the fact. I looked at the cream card again. Come alone this time. My first interpretation had been simple. The Whitmers did not want Ivy at the next event. Now other possibilities were opening, and none of them were good. Maybe Naomi blamed Ivy for making the interaction messy. Maybe Naomi blamed me for bringing someone she considered unvetted. Maybe Naomi wanted me alone because she preferred to discuss the museum without a junior staff member present. Or maybe, most unpleasantly, she wanted to speak freely about Ivy herself. I hated that possibility so much I almost reached for my laptop right then. Instead, I asked, "Was there anything else?" Ivy looked up sharply. "What do you mean? Anything else that happened Saturday that I do not know about?" She hesitated again. Then she said, "I did not think it mattered." My stomach tightened. "Ivy." After a long pause, she said, "Mr. Whitmer found me near the coat room before you called the car." I kept my face neutral, but every nerve in me focused. "He said I was impressive," she went on. "Then he said the museum was lucky to have someone who did not sound rehearsed all the time." I said nothing. He was smiling when he said it. I think he meant it as a compliment. She swallowed. Then he asked whether I would be at the patron preview. And there it was, the first clean shift under the floorboards. "What did you say?" I said I assumed so. And he said, "Good. It is refreshing to meet someone who has not been trained into marble yet." A hot, immediate pulse of anger went through me. Not at Ivy. At him. At the smugness hidden inside a line like that. At the intimacy of offering a junior staff member a private little critique of her mentor class under the cover of charm. I should have seen it. I should have anticipated it because I had spent years around men who liked to play benevolent truth-teller whenever a younger woman made them feel interesting. "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday?" I asked. She gave me a look I deserved. "Would you have believed it mattered?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. Because honest answer? Not enough. Not at first. I would have sorted it under donor vanity. Mild boundary blur. Something to note. Maybe. But not something I would have centered. I would have gone right back to the cleaner narrative. The more institutionally useful one. Young coordinator overstepped. Senior officer corrects course. Meanwhile, the truth would have been messier and much less flattering to the ecosystem I had built my career inside. My watch buzzed again. Team meeting in 5 minutes. Neither of us acknowledged it. I said, "Did he make you uncomfortable?" Ivy considered the question more carefully than most people do. "Not exactly," she said. "Not in a way I could point to cleanly. It just felt like he was talking to me against you. And then yesterday, I saw that note and realized I had probably become a story in their house. That landed with a dull ache because she was probably right. Rich people in private do not need facts to construct meaning. They need one odd evening and enough confidence to narrate everyone else's motives for them. I stood and crossed to the window, mostly because sitting felt impossible. Below us, the garden paths cut precise lines through the old snow. A bronze figure at the center fountain lifted its face into the gray cold like it was waiting for spring to explain itself. Behind me, Ivy said, "I know how this sounds." I turned. "How?" "Like I am trying to make this more complicated so I do not have to admit I mishandled it." I leaned against the window ledge. "Did you mishandle it?" "Yes," she said immediately, "but not in the neat way you wanted. For some reason that was the sentence that opened everything. Not the card, not the donor, not even the image of Naomi testing Ivy with velvet questions under chandelier light. It was that line, because she was right again. I had wanted neatness, a coachable mistake, a tidy debrief, a small professional lesson I could deliver and file away. Instead, I had a junior colleague who had been screened, patronized, and privately flattered in the same evening, then called into my office and told, with all the polished logic in the world, that she had misread the room. I moved back to my desk, sat down, and for the first time let my own certainty loosen. "Why did you ask me if you embarrassed me?" I said. She was quiet for a beat. "Because this is not the first place where someone has tried to teach me how to be acceptable." The sentence settled between us like something old. I felt the shape of a deeper story then. One she had not yet given me, but I could already sense the edges of it. Previous jobs, previous rooms, previous women maybe, smiling as they sanded the roughness off her and calling it mentoring. I did not push, not yet. Instead I said, "I want to handle this correctly." Ivy's expression did not soften. For me or for the Whitmers, the honest answer was both, and I had already learned once that morning what hesitation cost, so I gave her the truth. "For both," I said. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. Then she reached into her tote bag again and pulled out her phone. "There is one more thing," she said. She unlocked it, scrolled, and turned the screen toward me. It was a social media post from a private account belonging to a trustee's daughter, tagged from Saturday night, a cluster of polished guests and candlelight, crystal glasses, soft gold walls, the kind of photo people post to prove a room happened. In the background, half out of focus, were Naomi Whitmer and me, and just behind us, close enough to look intentional even if it was not, was Callahan Whitmer leaning toward Ivy with an expression that made my stomach drop, not because it was scandalous, because it was familiar, warm, interested, proprietary in the smallest possible way. The caption read, "Beautiful night at the Whitmer's place. New museum girl is causing a stir." I stared at the post long enough for the image to blur, not because the caption was devastating on its own. In another context, It might even have passed as harmless party chatter, but reputation does not get damaged by one obvious catastrophe most of the time. It gets altered by a dozen small impressions that start attaching themselves to your name until people cannot remember which part was fact and which part was mood. New museum girl is causing a stir. I knew exactly how that line would travel. First, as a joke, then as shorthand, then as a reason to treat Ivy like an amusing side note instead of a serious colleague. And once that happened, everything she said afterward would have to climb uphill through somebody else's invented version of her. I handed the phone back. Who sent this to you? She follows that account, Ivy said. Our events assistant. She thought I should know in case it spread. Has it? Not publicly. The account is private. Private. Another word that meant almost nothing in social circles built on screenshots. I picked up the cream card again, then set it down, picked up my coffee, realized it had gone cold, and set that down too. My team meeting was starting right then, and I missed it deliberately. I opened my laptop. Who are you emailing? Ivy asked. Not emailing, I said. What a calling. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. Naomi? No. I looked up at her. Eliana first. I want to know exactly how those materials came in, who handled them, and whether that note was meant to be seen by staff. Then I am calling our executive director before this becomes hallway gossip with donor names attached. Ivy watched me for a moment like she was trying to decide whether this was genuine or managerial theater. Then she said, "You do not have to make it bigger." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because women like us get trained so early to avoid becoming trouble that sometimes we start protecting the very systems that embarrass us. They already made it bigger, I said. Quietly. I called Eliana first. She confirmed the packet had arrived by courier in a sealed envelope from Naomi's office late Sunday afternoon. She had opened it because it was labeled for donor prep and assumed it was routine. The handwritten note had been paperclipped to the addendum. She had not mentioned it to anyone else, but she had seen it, and the discomfort in her voice told me that was enough. Information does not need a crowd. It just needs one witness with eyebrows. After that, I called our executive director, Soren. He was a careful man in the way institutions often reward. Not flashy, not particularly warm, but very good at recognizing where reputational risk ended and ethical obligation began. I asked if he had 10 minutes in private. He said yes immediately, which meant my voice had already told him enough. I gave him the facts without embroidery. Small donor pre-gala event. Junior staff member brought for development exposure. A donor interaction that became socially murky. A follow-up note excluding the junior staff member. A private social media caption framing her like an amusing spectacle. A concern that this was moving beyond etiquette, into something that could affect her standing, and the museum's professionalism. I did not present myself as blameless. I did not say she overstepped and leave it there. I said I had given feedback too early and too narrowly because I had been looking at donor management before I looked at power. Soren was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Do not contact the Whitmers yet." That was not what I wanted to hear, but it was what I expected. "I am not asking permission to escalate theatrically," I said. "I am asking us not to let a donor family define one of our staff members in private while we act like nothing happened." "I know," he said. "Give me 1 hour." I hung up and looked at Ivy. She was standing in the same place, but something in her posture had changed. Not softer, just less braced. "What happens in 1 hour?" she asked. "I find out whether the museum intends to behave like a museum or like a nervous dinner guest." That got the faintest flicker from her, not a smile, the ghost of one. The next hour moved with the strange thickness bad mornings have. I emailed my team that I was handling a donor matter and would send meeting notes later. I asked Eliana to forward me the courier details and the full event materials chain. I had our communications manager flag the private post in case it surfaced more widely. Then, because I had learned enough by then to stop pretending clean professionalism fixed human damage by itself, I closed my office door again and said the thing I should have said much earlier. "I owe you an apology." Ivy did not rush to rescue me from it. I went on. "I was not wrong that the room shifted, but I made your behavior the only problem because that was the cleanest story available to me. It let me stay in the role I understand best, the competent one, the one who can correct and protect at the same time." Her face remained still, but she was listening. "I should have asked more before I explained more," I said. "I should have wondered why someone as sharp as you would suddenly overtalk in a room you had otherwise handled beautifully, and I should have considered that if I entered to smooth something over, what felt efficient to me might feel exposing to you." A long silence. Then Ivy said, "Thank you." Not warmly, not coldly, just honestly. I let out a breath I had been holding for hours. She looked down at the phone still in her hand. "I did mishandle part of it. I know. I wanted Naomi to hear that I knew what she was doing. I know. And some part of me liked that he kept talking to me like I was the only real person there. That one hurt to hear. Not because it made me think less of her, but because it was human in such an ordinary, dangerous way. We all like being singled out until we understand the terms." "I know," I said again. She gave a tiny nod, as if something inside her had unclenched. Then she said, "At my last job, A senior woman told me I was excellent in meetings, but I needed to be less visible when men found me interesting. She said it like a strategy tip. Like weather. I felt disgust move through me, cold and clean. I quit 2 months later, Ivy said. So when you asked to debrief, I thought maybe you were about to say the same thing in nicer language. The truth of it burned because my language had in fact been nicer, more polished, more museum-shaped. But if the emotional destination felt similar, then my elegance did not absolve me. I am sorry, I said again. And this time I meant it without trying to guide where it landed. At almost 10, Soren called me back. He wanted both of us in his office. We went upstairs together. His office overlooked the main atrium, all limestone and glass and winter light. On the wall behind him hung a painting our board loved because it looked expensive and vaguely moral. He motioned for us to sit. I have spoken with Naomi Whitmer, he said. I felt Ivy go still beside me. Soren folded his hands. She described the note as an attempt at efficiency. She claims she thought a smaller preview conversation would be better handled by senior staff only. I almost spoke, but he lifted one finger slightly. Not yet. She also said, he continued, that she found Saturday lively and enjoyed meeting Ivy. That was exactly the sort of sentence wealthy people use when they want to leave themselves 5 exits. And, Soren said, when I told her a private guest post had characterized one of our staff members in a way we considered unprofessional, she became very concerned. Of course she did. What does concern mean? I asked. It means the post is being removed. It means her office will be sending a written clarification that the patron preview attendance list is still under museum control. And it means Callahan Whitmer will not be participating in staff-facing cultivation events for the remainder of this season. I looked at him carefully. He agreed to that. Soren's expression did not change. He was not offered much room to disagree. For the first time all morning, I felt something like relief. Not victory, relief. Because the solution was not loud. It would not become a scandal. No one would be dramatically exposed in a ballroom. No one would lose social standing in public view, but the line had been moved where it mattered. Access. That is what people like the Whitmers understand better than apologies. Who gets welcomed? Who gets trusted? Who gets the easy proximity they assumed they had earned? Ivy spoke then, her voice very calm. Does everyone in the building know about this now? Soren looked at her directly. No, and they will not. Claire framed this as a staff protection issue, not a gossip issue. I did not realize until that second how afraid I had been that he would compliment me in some executive language that made the whole thing sound strategic instead of human. I was grateful he did not. Instead, he said, Ivy, you are good at your job. You will continue developing in your role. But I do think Claire's original point remains partly true. Not because you need to be polished into something smaller. Because some rooms invite disclosure they have not earned. I watched Ivy absorb that. Then she gave one measured nod. That makes sense. And because it did, because now it was framed inside the fuller truth instead of replacing it, the sentence landed differently. After we left his office, we rode the elevator down in silence. At the second floor, the doors opened to our hallway. Ivy stepped out, then paused. Claire, I looked at her. I did want you to be impressed with me, she said that night. I smiled a little, tired and honest. I was. Before, during, and after the bad part, she held my gaze for a second and there it was. Not forgiveness exactly, but a return to solid ground. Then she went to her desk. The rest of the week was oddly quiet. The post disappeared by lunch. A revised preview list arrived Thursday with no handwritten notes. Naomi's assistant sent a perfectly polished message confirming Ivy's inclusion in upcoming communications planning. It read like clean glass. Nothing to see. Nowhere to cut yourself. But things had changed. Not publicly enough for anyone to narrate with confidence. Just enough for the people who needed to understand. Callahan stopped drifting through our offices before events. Naomi became exquisitely formal with me. And Ivy, without becoming harder, became more precise. She no longer filled conversational silence just because powerful people seemed to enjoy it. She learned how to let a question sit, how to answer half an inch cooler, how to leave first sometimes. A month later, at the spring patron preview, I watched her speak with a collector near the Roman gallery. She was poised, easy, fully herself, warm, but bounded. The collector laughed. Ivy smiled. Then, right at the point where most junior staff would have chased a stronger connection, she touched the woman's elbow lightly and said, I should let you circulate, but I hope we talk again before the evening ends. Perfect. Not because it was rehearsed, because it was chosen. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the catering staff was clearing the final glasses, I walked back into my office to drop off my heels and found something on my chair. A slim black training binder. No, just the binder. I opened it. It was the old donor onboarding manual I had written years ago, when I still believed every lesson worth teaching could be listed in bullet points and passed down like table settings. A yellow sticky note marked one page in the middle. I turned to it. The section heading read, Read the room before you read the person. And beneath it, in Ivy's neat handwriting, she had added one sentence. Sometimes the room is reading her first. I sat down slowly, binder open on my lap, and laughed once under my breath because it was such a clean correction. Not cruel, not sentimental, just true. I left the note there. I did not rewrite the manual that night. But the next morning I started. There is something I want to say, just as myself for a second. What stays with me about things like this is how easy it is to confuse polish with wisdom. Especially if you are good at your job. Especially if people reward you for staying composed. You start thinking calm means correct. And sometimes it does. But sometimes calm just means you are standing in the part of the system that hurts less. That is the part nobody likes to admit. Because a lot of guidance sounds reasonable when you strip away who gets to say it, who has to absorb it, and what it costs the other person to hear it. That is where the truth usually is, not in the sentence by itself, in the weight underneath it. I also think people can be wrong in the moment and still deserve to be protected. Those things can exist together. Someone can overtalk, misread, get flustered, try too hard, all of that, and still not deserve to become a private joke in a rich person's house. That matters to me. And honestly, I think a lot of us have been on both sides of this in smaller ways, saying something we thought was helpful, hearing something that was technically fair and still cut deeper than the speaker understood. Real life is full of that. It is messy. It is not neat. It does not sort itself into innocent and guilty as cleanly as people want. What matters after that is what you do when the fuller truth finally shows up. For me, that is the part that lasts.